A small family in Vermont unexpectedly befriended a mischievous raccoon named Bandit. Once just a rascal raiding trash cans, Bandit became the constant shadow of their newborn baby. But when the mother's best friend came to babysit, Bandit turned aggressive, leaving everyone unsettled. Then one night, the security camera exposed a shocking truth that forced them to call the police. The first time Sarah Miller saw the little raccoon, he was wedged between the recycling bin and a half-tipped trash can behind their cedar-fenced yard, his striped tail sticking out like a fuzzy flag of surrender. It was late afternoon in early spring, the kind of Vermont day that still held a bite in the breeze, but let the sun pour down just enough to make you hopeful. Sarah set the grocery bags on the back stoop and crouched. The raccoon turned his head, one eye bright and wary, the other blinking slow from a crust of road dust. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said, gentle as a hymn. "What are you doing in my mess?" He didn't run. He just lifted both little hands, not paws, that's how they looked to Sarah, and pressed them to the lip of the bin, as if asking permission. When he tried to climb, he made a soft chittering sound that landed somewhere between a squeak and complaint. The lid slipped, thunked his shoulder, and he froze, startled, before rallying with an indignant snort. "Your trouble," Sarah said, smiling despite herself. By the time David pulled into the driveway, the raccoon had successfully pried the bin open and liberated one slightly bruised apple. He sat on his haunches by the lilac bush, peeling the skin with quick, clever motions. Sarah stood a good few feet away with a garden rake held sideways like a shepherd's staff, just in case. David stepped out of his pickup, took in the scene, and shook his head. "All I asked was to keep the trash upright for one day." "It's not my fault he's got fingers," Sarah said. "Look at him." David did. He was the practical one, the one who read manuals front to back, the one who could fix the old boiler with a paperclip and a prayer. But even he softened at the sight. The raccoon's fur was a little patchy along one shoulder, where something, wire maybe, or a fence, had rubbed it raw. Beneath the mask of gray, his eyes were clear and curious. He ate the apple in neat spirals, and then, without ceremony, toddled toward Sarah, as if to inspect the rest of her groceries. "Hey, personal space," David warned, stepping between them. The raccoon paused, sniffed David's boot, then reached to tug the dangling shoelace with the gravest concentration. Sarah laughed. "He's a thief, a tiny, shameless thief." Later, when the sun had slid behind the spruce line and the backyard shadows turned long, they set out a shallow dish of water and a few slices of firm pear placed near the fence where the motion light didn't glare. The raccoon ate, drank, and, as though remembering some previous appointment, disappeared through the gap under the gate with a rustle of leaves. They didn't expect him back. Vermont woods have a way of swallowing visitors, and David was sure the little bandit would find his tribe and forget them. But the next morning, as Sarah stepped onto the porch with her coffee, there he was on the second stair, sitting upright like a small gray monk, hands folded on his belly. He blinked at her, then padded to her feet, sniffed the steam, and, bold as ever, tapped the mug twice, approving. "Well," Sarah said, "I guess we have a neighbor." They started calling him Bandit, because what else do you call a raccoon who can untie knots and open the pantry door if you're careless with the latch? By the end of the week, Bandit knew that the blue bowl by the back steps was his, and that the humans who lived here were slow but trainable. He learned the sound of David's keys, the squeak in the third porch board, the exact hour the school bus sighed past the mill pond and let the neighborhood kids loose like marbles across the street. Martha, Sarah's mother, arrived on Sunday with a rhubarb pie and a list of concerns. Martha believed in God, cast iron, and common sense in that order. She stood in the kitchen doorway and stared through the screen at Bandit, who was busy trying to roll a forgotten tennis ball up the incline of the garden path. Every time he got close to the top, the ball slipped sideways, and he'd scold it soundly before starting again. "Raccoons don't belong on porches," Martha said. "They belong in the woods, making mischief out there, not under your roof." "He's not under the roof," Sarah said. "Technically, he's under the sky." "Technically, you are soft," Martha replied, though a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Look at him." "He's negotiating with a ball." David wiped his hands on a shop towel and joined them. "He's thin. That patch on his shoulder is healing, but slow. I called the wildlife rehab line. They said as long as he's mobile and eating, best not to bring him in. Keep him at arm's length, don't feed him junk, and don't be idiots." Martha clicked her tongue. At least someone said it out loud. They tried to be sensible. They kept the windows latched when cooking, kept the pantry closed, kept the blue bowl filled with fresh water and the fence gap wide enough that Bandit could come and go. What they couldn't keep was their laughter. Bandit had a way of making ordinary minutes into small circus acts. He learned to nudge the porch swing until it swayed. He stole one of David's work gloves and paraded across the yard holding it like a flag, then hid it in Sarah's rain boot and waited, invisible under the fern, for the shout that inevitably followed. "Bandit," Sarah would call, half scold, half delight. "You rascal." On Tuesday evening, rain lashed the clapboards and banded the windows with silver. The house held the wet wool smell of damp coats drying on hooks. Sarah sat on the couch with a blanket over her knees, a stack of graded spelling tests at her side. Bandit, who had wriggled through the dog door they didn't own a dog to justify, hopped up uninvited and settled into the blanket like it had always been there for him. He was warm. He smelled faintly of leaves and the mineral tang of the creek. "Absolutely not," David said from the doorway, hands on hips. Bandit looked at him solemnly, then reached for the corner of the blanket and tucked it under his own chin, as if to demonstrate proper blanket etiquette. "Lord help me," David muttered. "I'm negotiating with a raccoon." Sarah should have shooed him down. She knew it. She didn't. There was a softness inside her lately, a hush under the noise of days, like the house had made room for something and was waiting. When Bandit shifted, he didn't curl into her lap like a cat would. He crawled higher, careful as a nurse, and lay across her lower belly, his cheek settling right where her hands idly rested. It startled her, the certainty of it, the way heat bloomed there and seemed to settle her bones. "What's he doing?" David asked, amused and a little baffled. "Warming me up," she said, laughing it off. But she touched the crown of Bandit's head and felt, no, imagined, a communication as simple and old as breathing. "Here, I'll stay. Here, I watch." By Thursday, Bandit had revised his job description. If Sarah stretched out on the couch or napped after dinner, he found her. If she shifted, he adjusted. When she went upstairs to fold laundry, he trotted behind, bumping each step with a soft, hollow sound. If she closed a door, he sat outside of it and laid one hand on the crack at the bottom, as if keeping count of her footsteps on the other side. "You've got a shadow," David said. "A bandit-shaped shadow." Martha watched all this with a mixture of exasperation and a tenderness she refused to name. "He's smart," she allowed, slicing pie. "Too smart. Don't you start treating him like a baby, Sarah. That way, sorrow lies." "I won't," Sarah said. But when she rose from the table, Bandit rose too. And when she went to the sink, he stood up against the cabinet and peered, as if to inspect the suds. That night the wind settled, the rain eased to a whisper. They opened the bedroom window a crack and let the pine smell drift in. Sometime after midnight, Sarah stirred. She wasn't fully awake, some borderland between dream and the old house's hum, when she felt weight at the foot of the bed, then a careful shuffle. She blinked into the dark and made out the faintest outline. Bandit, brave beyond his station, easing himself onto the quilt like a polite stowaway. He didn't come near their faces. He didn't even settle at their feet. He crept, slow as prayer, to the hollow above Sarah's hips, and laid himself there with such deliberate gentleness that she let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Bandit," she whispered. She meant to scold. Instead, she set her palm on his back. Beneath fur, muscle fluttered, then steadied. He made a sound so low she felt it more than heard it, a thrumming comfort against her skin. David turned over, drowsy. "Is that our alarm system?" "It's just Bandit," she said. "He's keeping watch." 2 days later, when the forsythia burst into second-hand gold along the fence and the mud in the driveway finally gave up its grip on their boots, Sarah stood in the upstairs bathroom with the door locked and the world very quiet. The little white stick on the edge of the sink bloomed a second pink line as soft and certain as dawn. She had seen zeros before, so many months lined up behind them like empty picture frames. But this was not a zero. This was something. She pressed both hands to her mouth and laughed, then cried, then laughed again. Downstairs, Bandit paced. He paced the length of the hallway, the width of the kitchen tile, the seam between rug and wood. He trotted to the stairs, climbed 2, retreated, tried again. When Sarah opened the bathroom door at last, she found him there on the landing, hands spread on the top stair, eyes bright as coins. She sat right there beside him, cross-legged on the runner, and Bandit climbed into the curve of her legs and placed one small human-looking hand where her heartbeat thudded fastest. "Did you know?" she whispered. "Did you know before I did?" He blinked very solemnly, as if to say that some news arrives by scent, and some by light, and some by a chord you can't quite hear, unless you're still. Sarah rested her palm over his, and for a moment, that would echo through everything that followed, believed that the small, mischievous creature at her knee had heard it first. When David came home, she told him. There was joy in it, bright and stunned, the kind that makes you talk too loud in kitchens and forget where you left the salt. Martha came the next morning with flowers in a coffee tin and a lecture about prenatal vitamins. Bandit, unschooled in such matters, simply redoubled his efforts at watchkeeping. He slept under the coffee table facing the hallway, as if guarding the path from front door to stairs. He learned the sound of the mail slot and the difference between the neighbor boy's skateboard and the UPS truck. At night, he curled in the doorway of the bedroom. Then, when Sarah's breathing eased and deepened, he crept to the foot of the bed and placed himself on the same old spot with a faithful exactness that made David shake his head and grin in the dark. "You've got yourself a nurse," he murmured. "I've got myself a bandit," she said. Out back, the lilacs fattened into buds. In the evenings, porch lights winked on up and down the street, a quiet code of neighborhoods settling in. And if you were to stand at the edge of the miller's yard as the first peepers started their thin, brave chorus in the ditch, you might have seen a small figure cross from shadow to shadow with the assurance of someone who has found his post. He'd pause by the second stair, listen, then climb. And if his little hands left damp prints on the porch boards, well, no one said anything about that. Inside, the house breathed, and the woman upstairs slept with a gentle weight upon her belly, and the story that would one day make strangers stop and listen had already, without anyone quite naming it, begun. The first weeks of Sarah's pregnancy moved with the slow rhythm of spring, days stretching a little longer, nights carrying a faint chorus of frogs down by the creek. Sarah carried her secret close, letting it bloom in her heart before she was ready to speak it aloud beyond the circle of family. David walked around in a kind of daze, protective in ways he hadn't been before, topping off her water glass, checking the locks twice at night, trying clumsily but earnestly to shoulder her every burden. And in the middle of it all was Bandit, their gray-striped, bright-eyed companion, behaving as though this news had been his all along. Bandit's antics did not stop. He still raided the recycling bin for shiny cans, still found ways to pry open the pantry door to filch a cracker box. But his mischief seemed threaded with intention. Each time Sarah stretched out to rest, Bandit would hop to her side and settle his chin across her midsection with a seriousness at odds with his usual rascal ways. He would lie there for long minutes, eyes half closed, yet always alert. If David walked past, Bandit's gaze followed him, not hostile, but measuring, as though ensuring he moved carefully around Sarah. Martha noticed first. One evening, she stopped by with a pot of beef stew, claiming Sarah needed real food and not just cereal and crackers. Bandit was curled on the rug, one hand possessively resting on Sarah's slippered foot. "He knows," Martha muttered, setting down the pot. "Animals sense it before we do. It's written in their bones." Sarah smiled but said nothing. Yet later, when she lay in bed with the window cracked and the smell of pine drifting in, she found herself whispering to the raccoon curled stubbornly at her hip. "Did you know first? Before me? Is that why you wouldn't leave me alone?" Bandit blinked once, solemn, and adjusted his position until his cheek rested right where her heartbeat quickened. When the neighbors came by to congratulate them after the news spread, Bandit's behavior became something of a running joke. The Petersons from across the street brought a casserole, only to have Bandit attempt to drag the foil pan straight off the counter while everyone laughed. "You've got a watchdog in raccoon clothing," Mr. Peterson chuckled, watching the animal retreat under the table with his prize. David rescued the dish, but Sarah couldn't help laughing as she stroked Bandit's head. Mischief was his language, and somehow it soothed her. Still, there were moments that unsettled her. Not long after, Sarah's longtime friend Kelly arrived for coffee. Kelly had been part of Sarah's life since college, a woman with a quick laugh and sharp eyes who knew every detail of their years of struggle to conceive. She came with flowers and hugs, her smile wide, her voice pitched in joy. Yet Bandit's reaction was instant and unmistakable. The raccoon froze on the stairwell, hackles slightly raised, his little hands pressed flat to the wood as if bracing himself. When Kelly leaned down to coo at him, he backed up 3 steps, chittered low, and refused to come closer. "Oh, come on," Kelly said, forcing a laugh. "Does he always look at people like they're burglars?" "Not usually," Sarah said carefully. "He's picky sometimes." Bandit shadowed the rest of the visit. If Kelly shifted closer on the couch, Bandit shifted too, planting himself on the floor between her and Sarah. When Kelly rose to pour another cup of coffee, Bandit stood upright, balancing on his hind legs, watching her every movement like a sentinel. His eyes never left her. David tried to smooth things over. "He's just overprotective," he said. "It's new territory for him. Give him time." Kelly brushed it off, but when she left, Sarah noticed Bandit circling the door, sniffing the air long after the taillights faded. Later that evening, as Sarah folded baby clothes given by a neighbor, Bandit nosed his way into the pile, tugged one tiny onesie free, and curled around it like treasure. Mischief, yes, but also something else. Sarah bent low and whispered, "What are you trying to tell me, little Bandit?" Days passed, and Bandit's vigilance grew. Delivery drivers, neighbors, even Martha herself, all earned Bandit's inspection, a moment of scrutiny before he relented. Yet Kelly remained the one he could not abide. When she came by with a bag of baby toys, Bandit darted forward and snatched the rattle from her hand, scampering under the table with it. Kelly laughed tightly, but Sarah saw the flare of irritation in her eyes. Bandit gnawed the rattle once, dropped it, and padded back to sit near Sarah's chair, unrepentant. "You're spoiling him," Martha scolded another evening when she caught Sarah feeding Bandit slices of apple under the table. "You treat him like a child." "He's family," Sarah said. "He's been with us from the start." "Family bites, sometimes," Martha warned. Yet, when the house was quiet at night, Sarah couldn't deny the comfort of that furry body pressed close, the steady rhythm of his breath against her side. Mischief and all, Bandit was her shadow, her strange guardian in striped fur. The first flutter of life inside her came one Saturday afternoon while she was napping in the sunroom. She startled awake, hand pressed to her belly, sure she had imagined it. Bandit was already there, perched on the arm of the couch, watching her intently. When she laughed in wonder and brushed a tear away, Bandit stretched out one hand, placed it gently on her stomach, and gave a soft, approving chirr. It was a moment she would never forget, a signal, unspoken but sure, that the mischievous little raccoon understood more than anyone else could. And yet, in the days that followed, his sharp eyes and tense posture, whenever Kelly entered the house, unsettled Sarah in ways she couldn't name. Mischief was one thing. Warnings were another. She began to wonder if Bandit's signals weren't simply affection, but caution, an instinct whispering that something or someone was wrong. Autumn settled over Vermont in russet and gold, the maples catching fire before the frost could claim them. Sarah felt every day stretch into weeks as her due date approached, her body carrying both the weight of exhaustion and the trembling joy of expectation. David counted down the hours with nervous energy, patching small repairs around the house, painting trim that didn't need it, fussing over the crib he had already assembled twice. Martha came and went with casseroles and instructions, her love expressed through checklists and clattering pans. And always there was Bandit, hovering near Sarah like a self-appointed guardian who had taken his duties to heart. The night of Emma's birth came with sleet lashing the windows of the hospital in Burlington. After hours of labor that left Sarah drained and trembling, she finally heard her daughter's first thin wail pierce the sterile quiet. Emma Grace Miller, small and fierce, was bundled into her arms, her downy head pressed against Sarah's chest. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "You're here. My girl, you're here." David's hands trembled when he touched them both, his face wet though he didn't realize it. 2 days later, they pulled into their driveway, the world outside glistening under a thin skin of ice. Sarah walked carefully, her body still tender, as David lifted the infant carrier with the solemnity of a sacred vessel. Martha hovered at their heels, fussing with scarves and boots. But what caught Sarah's attention first was the striped figure perched at the window. Bandit's eyes gleamed through the glass, his mask framed by frost. When David carried the baby inside, Bandit bounded down from the sill and approached slowly, step by deliberate step, like a soldier receiving new orders. He sniffed the air, his nose twitching, then let out a small, churring sound Sarah had never heard from him before. Bandit sat upright, paws folded neatly, his gaze fixed on Emma's tiny face, as if memorizing her. "Careful," David warned softly, though his own voice carried awe. Sarah lowered the carrier just enough. Bandit leaned in, not close enough to touch, but close enough that his breath misted the edge of the blanket. Emma stirred, squirming under his inspection. Then Bandit made the strangest sound, gentle, almost maternal, a quiet trill that seemed more lullaby than warning. He padded to the rug and curled at the base of the carrier, his posture alert, as if declaring, "This child is mine to guard." That night, Emma slept in the crib David had built, the nursery walls painted pale blue with stenciled stars Sarah had brushed by hand. Bandit settled directly beneath the crib and refused to move, even when David tried luring him out with a slice of apple. "Leave him," Sarah whispered, exhaustion pulling at her voice. "He's appointed himself her nurse." When Emma cried at 2 in the morning, the baby monitor crackled. But Bandit was already pacing at the nursery door before the sound reached the machine. David blinked in astonishment. "He beat the monitor," he muttered, scooping Emma into his arms. Bandit sat back, satisfied, his eyes shining in the dim nightlight. Over the weeks, a rhythm formed. Sarah nursed Emma in the small hours, her hair tangled, her eyes heavy, while Bandit kept watch from the corner of the room. When Sarah laid Emma on the playmat for tummy time, Bandit sprawled beside her, close but careful, his head cocked in fascination at the tiny fists flailing in determination. When Martha visited and scooped the baby up with grandmotherly coos, Bandit watched sharply, but allowed it, as though recognizing blood ties. "He's like a furry nursemaid," Sarah said one evening, rocking Emma by the fire. "Better than half the babysitters I ever had." David chuckled. "He's also emptied the pantry twice this week." Guardian angel, yes. Grocery thief, also yes. One Sunday, the neighbors came with congratulations and gifts. Children crowded into the living room, eager to glimpse the baby. Bandit tolerated the noise with stiff dignity until one boy let out a piercing shout. Emma startled, her tiny face crumpling into a cry. Instantly, Bandit chirred in agitation, hustling across the rug to plant himself beside her bassinet. The children giggled nervously, and their parents ushered them back, murmuring apologies. Bandit stayed at his post until Emma settled again, his eyes unwavering. Not every moment was solemn, of course. Bandit's mischief threaded through their days, reminding them he was no saint, only himself. He stole Emma's pacifier and tried to fit it into his own mouth, cross-eyed in confusion until David rescued it. He dragged a blanket halfway up the stairs before tumbling down with a thump, popping up indignant as if the fabric had betrayed him. Once he pawed at the diaper bag until wipes and rattles scattered across the floor, sitting squarely in the mess like a monarch surveying treasure. But even in those antics, there was a strange kind of devotion. Bandit's chaos was never directed at Emma. With her, he was patient, almost reverent. He tolerated her sudden cries, her restless movements, the strange scents of baby powder and milk. Sarah began to trust him in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Martha remained cautious. One afternoon, she pulled Sarah aside while David fixed a leaky faucet. "I don't like how much you rely on that creature. He's clever, yes, but wild things stay wild. Don't fool yourself." Sarah touched her mother's arm. "He hasn't given me one reason to doubt him." Martha sighed, her lined face shadowed with worry. "Just remember, Sarah, it only takes one moment, one mistake." That night, Sarah sat in the rocking chair with Emma asleep against her chest. Bandit lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, golden eyes half closed. The fire crackled low, and the room felt wrapped in safety. Sarah bent her head, whispering into the soft hair of her child, but her eyes drifted to the raccoon, who guarded them both. She felt the steady pulse of gratitude, as though fate had planted this mischievous sentinel in their lives for a reason. What she could not have known was that Bandit's watchfulness was more than instinct. Something in him had already sensed what they had yet to discover. An unease that would soon rise from the shadows of trust, carried into their home by the very person Sarah had once called her truest friend. By the time Emma was 3 months old, Sarah's maternity leave was winding down, and the thought of returning to the classroom weighed on her shoulders like a pack of stones. She had always loved teaching. Chalk dust, children's laughter, the comfort of routine. But the idea of leaving her baby in someone else's care made her chest ache. David reassured her each night, holding Emma against his broad chest, whispering that they would figure it out together. Yet Sarah lay awake anyway, listening to the house breathe and to the soft scratch of claws on the hallway floorboards where Bandit paced like a sentry. It was David who first suggested Kelly. "She's between jobs," he reasoned one Saturday morning as they folded tiny onesies in the nursery. "She adores you, and she's been asking to help. Who better than your best friend?" Sarah hesitated, the fabric warm between her hands. Kelly had been a part of her life since college, the kind of friend who could finish her sentences, who had stood as maid of honor at her wedding, who had brought flowers to the hospital after Emma was born. The idea made sense, and yet she thought of the way Bandit bristled every time Kelly crossed the threshold, the way his golden eyes hardened and followed her. Still, practicality won. A week later, Kelly arrived with a bright smile and a tote bag of toys she had picked out herself. She cooed over Emma, nuzzling her cheek, and declared how thrilled she was to be godmother, babysitter, and auntie all rolled into one. Sarah smiled, trying to let relief settle in. But Bandit had other ideas. The raccoon froze in the hallway, his fur rising along his spine, little hands gripping the floorboards. When Kelly leaned down to stroke his head, Bandit darted sideways, circling the crib as though drawing a line between Emma and the visitor. He let out a low chitter, a warning Sarah had only heard once before, when a stray dog had wandered too close to the yard. "Oh, come on, you silly thing," Kelly said lightly. "I'm not here to steal your thunder." Sarah laughed weakly, but she noticed the way Bandit planted himself beneath the crib when Kelly lowered Emma inside, his eyes fixed not on the baby, but on Kelly's hands. As the days passed, the tension grew. Kelly tried her best to ignore the animal, chatting with Sarah about old memories, about Emma's chubby cheeks and bright eyes, but Bandit never relaxed. He shadowed Kelly's every move. If she walked to the kitchen, he padded behind. If she bent to pick up Emma's toy, he would dart forward to snatch it first, holding it possessively as if daring her to try. "Maybe we should keep him out of the nursery," Kelly suggested one afternoon, her smile tight. "He's making me nervous. What if he scratches the baby?" Sarah glanced at Bandit, who was perched on the edge of the rocking chair, his gaze steady. "He hasn't so much as touched her wrong," she said. "Not once." Kelly shrugged, but her eyes betrayed annoyance. "Suit yourself, but don't say I didn't warn you." Later that evening, Sarah recounted the conversation to David. He frowned, running a hand over his jaw. "He's never been like this with anyone else. Your mom, the neighbors, even the kids across the street. He's cautious, sure, but not hostile. With Kelly, it's like he's seeing something we can't." "Or maybe he's jealous," Sarah offered, though even as she spoke the words, she didn't believe them. One Saturday, Kelly arrived while David was working on a project in the garage. Sarah left Emma in the crib and stepped out to fetch fresh laundry. When she returned, she froze in the doorway. Bandit was in the middle of the room, his paws wrapped around Kelly's tote bag, tugging at the zipper with frantic urgency. Kelly bent low, her hands outstretched, her voice sharp. "Stop it! Give that back!" Bandit yanked so hard the bag toppled, spilling its contents across the rug. Diapers, wipes, a pacifier, a notebook. But among the jumble lay something else. A small black object, no bigger than a button. Sarah blinked, confused, as Kelly snatched it up quickly, her cheeks flushed. "Just a keychain camera," Kelly said too quickly, stuffing it back into the bag. "I was showing a friend how these things work. Forgot it was in there." Sarah tried to smile, to swallow the unease that rose like bile. Strange thing to carry in a diaper bag. Kelly laughed, but the sound was brittle. "I'm quirky. You know that." She gathered the rest of the items and changed the subject, but Bandit sat rigid by the crib, his eyes locked on her as though memorizing the shape of that tiny device. That night, when Sarah relayed the incident, David's brow furrowed. Why would she bring a camera in her babysitting bag? She said it was a mistake. Bandit, lying at their feet, chittered low, the sound vibrating with unease. Sarah tried to dismiss it, tried to tell herself that friends made odd choices, that Kelly had always been eccentric. Yet something lingered in the back of her mind, a whisper that perhaps Bandit's mistrust wasn't mischief, wasn't jealousy, but a warning. Days blurred into weeks. Emma grew stronger, her cries louder, her smile like sudden sunshine. Sarah found herself trusting Bandit's instincts more than she admitted aloud. Once, when Kelly reached to lift Emma from the crib, Bandit leapt onto the dresser and knocked a stack of folded clothes down between them, as though creating a barrier. Kelly's laughter was sharp around the edges. "Your pet really has it out for me." Sarah forced a smile, but her heart thudded. "Maybe he sees something we don't," she said quietly. Kelly rolled her eyes, but the words lingered in the room long after she left. And in the quiet hours of night, when the world hushed and Emma's breathing was soft as rain, Sarah would watch Bandit curled at the base of the crib, eyes half closed but never fully at rest. Mischievous thief, loyal sentinel, he was both, and something more. Sarah stroked his fur, whispering what she couldn't yet admit to anyone else. "If there's something wrong, you'll show me." "I trust you." Bandit's ear twitched, and his golden eyes glinted in the dark, full of a certainty Sarah didn't yet dare to name. By late winter, the Miller house had settled into a rhythm. Emma was learning to sit upright, wobbling like a little sailor on deck, her fists clutching at toys as if every rattle contained a secret. Sarah moved between teaching and motherhood with weary joy, her days full, her nights stitched together by half-sleep. David's evenings were spent rocking Emma in one arm while balancing building plans in the other. And through it all, Bandit remained a constant, slipping between guardian and trickster with seamless ease. He was the one who alerted Sarah to Emma's cries before the monitor did, the one who dragged a forgotten bottle across the rug as though to remind them of mealtime. But he was also the one who stole David's socks and dropped them into Martha's casserole dish, leaving the whole table laughing until they cried. Yet beneath the laughter ran a thread of unease. Kelly was still visiting, still babysitting, when Sarah's schedule left no choice, and Bandit's mistrust had only sharpened. The raccoon's golden eyes followed her every move. If she set Emma down, Bandit hovered. If she picked her up, he leapt to the dresser, tail flicking, body taut. One evening, after Kelly left, Sarah stood in the kitchen while David dried the dishes. She leaned against the counter, her voice low. "He's getting worse. He doesn't act like this with anyone else." "Maybe he's jealous," David said, though his brow furrowed. "Or maybe he's just attached to Emma in a way we don't understand." Sarah shook her head. "It's not jealousy. It feels like he's trying to stop something, like he's warning us." They were interrupted by Martha, who had stopped by to drop off a jar of her famous applesauce. She listened, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. "Don't ignore him," she said firmly. "Animals like him, they've got instincts sharper than ours. He sees what you don't." David gave a half smile, trying to lighten the air. You think our raccoon's a prophet now? I think he knows danger when it's standing in your nursery, Martha said. Her words lingered, even as Sarah tried to push them aside. The next week, the unease spilled into something Sarah could no longer dismiss. She came home earlier than expected from school. The sound of her car crunching in the driveway, startling Bandit into view at the front window. He was pacing, back and forth, his claws ticking against the glass. When she opened the door, he darted past her, rushing upstairs. Alarmed, Sarah followed, her heart pounding. The nursery door was ajar. She pushed it open to find Kelly cradling Emma. At first glance, nothing was amiss, but Bandit had planted himself at the threshold. His fur bristled, his body rigid. He let out a growl that vibrated in the floorboards. "Bandit, stop it!" Sarah scolded automatically, but the sound of her own voice wavered. Kelly's smile was strained. "He's been like this all afternoon. Honestly, Sarah, you've got to do something about him. He nearly clawed my skirt when I put Emma down for her nap." Bandit moved forward suddenly, claws scraping the wood until he stood between Kelly and the crib. His gaze never wavered from Kelly's face. Emma fussed, shifting in her arms, as if echoing the tension. Sarah hurried forward, taking her daughter. Instantly, Bandit's body relaxed, his tail lowering, his growl fading into a soft chitter. Kelly's laugh was sharp, almost defensive. "See? He hates me. It's not normal." That night, Sarah told David what had happened. He rubbed his forehead, troubled. "It's not aggression. He doesn't act like that with your mom, or with the neighbors. Only her. That's what makes me uneasy." Sarah set Emma in the crib and watched as Bandit curled beneath it, eyes half closed but alert. "Maybe he sees something we don't," she whispered. The next day, Kelly tried to laugh it off again. "You know, my grandmother had a parrot that despised my uncle. Would scream bloody murder every time he walked into the room. Some animals just fixate." But when Sarah looked down at Bandit, pressed against the crib's legs like a soldier at post, she wasn't so sure. The weeks wore on, the tension mounting with each visit. Bandit refused to leave the nursery if Kelly was inside, pacing and chittering, sometimes even climbing the dresser to keep watch from above. Emma, sensitive as only babies can be, grew fretful whenever Bandit growled. Sarah's nerves frayed under the constant push and pull. Her loyalty to Kelly, her trust in Bandit, her desperate need to keep Emma safe. One evening, after Kelly left, Martha stayed behind to help tidy the kitchen. As she scrubbed a dish, she said quietly, "I've lived long enough to know that betrayal often comes from where you least expect it. Bandit's telling you something. Listen." Sarah wanted to argue, but her throat closed around the words. The breaking point came a few days later. Sarah returned home from a meeting to hear scratching upstairs. She rushed to the nursery and found Bandit standing on his hind legs, claws raking at the floor just outside the door. Inside, Emma was fussing, her cries sharp. Sarah shoved the door open to see Kelly holding the baby. Nothing looked wrong, but Bandit's frantic scratching and low growl made Sarah's blood run cold. "What is wrong with him?" Kelly snapped, bouncing Emma. "You've got to get rid of him, Sarah. It's him or me." Sarah took Emma, her hands trembling, and Bandit instantly calmed, circling the crib before settling beneath it once more. Kelly shook her head, her mouth twisted with exasperation. "I don't know why you trust that animal more than your own friend." But as the door shut behind her, the house settled into a tense quiet. Emma drifted back to sleep. Sarah sat in the rocking chair, staring at the raccoon who lay like a shadow beneath the crib. "You see something, don't you?" she whispered. "Something I can't." Bandit opened one golden eye, blinked, and pressed his paw to the floor as if to say, "Trust me." Sarah leaned back, clutching Emma close, her heart aching with the weight of suspicion she could no longer ignore. The first real snow of the season fell heavy and fast, blanketing the Miller house in a muffled quiet. The trees stood tall in their white coats, and the whole street glowed under the street lamps like a postcard. Inside, Emma's soft cries echoed from the nursery, while Sarah bundled herself in a sweater, and David shoveled the front walk, his breath puffing in clouds. Bandit had stationed himself as always beneath the crib, tail curled around his body, golden eyes fixed on the door, as if nothing could pass without his say-so. It was the Millers' wedding anniversary, and for the first time in months, they dared to plan a short evening away, just dinner at Antonio's, the little Italian place 10 minutes down the road. Martha was out of town visiting her sister in Maine, and Sarah's co-workers were busy with their own families. That left Kelly, who had already volunteered eagerly. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked for the third time while slipping on her coat. Emma cooed in her bassinet, oblivious to the tension. "Positive," David said, reaching for her hand. "We deserve a night to ourselves. It's been nearly a year. Kelly's known you forever, and she can handle a few hours." From his post on the rug, Bandit lifted his head and let out a chitter, low and sharp. Sarah's stomach tightened. She bent to stroke his fur. "Be good, Bandit. Just one night." Kelly arrived with her usual bright smile, arms full of snacks and toys. She kissed Sarah's cheek and laughed. "Go have fun. I've got everything under control." But Bandit slunk into the corner, his gaze unblinking. At Antonio's, the warmth of candlelight and the hum of conversation eased Sarah's nerves for a while. She and David shared a plate of pasta, clinked glasses of red wine, and laughed like they hadn't in months. For the first time in so long, they felt like themselves again. Then, David's phone rang. The name on the screen froze Sarah's heart. Kelly. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Everything okay?" Kelly's voice was ragged, panicked. "You need to come home now. It's that raccoon of yours. He's gone crazy." Sarah's fork clattered to her plate. "What happened? Is Emma all right?" "She's crying in her crib, but I can't get to her," Kelly gasped. "Bandit lunged at me, snarling. He nearly bit me." "I'm locked in the bathroom. He's guarding the nursery like a demon. Please, hurry." David was already signaling for the check, his face pale. Sarah grabbed her purse, her mind spinning with fear. Emma crying alone. Bandit turned violent, the nightmare she had tried to dismiss now playing out in real time. The drive home took 15 minutes but felt like hours. Snowflakes streaked across the windshield, blurring the world outside. Sarah's imagination painted terrible pictures. Emma in danger, Bandit unhinged, Kelly injured. When they finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked still, the porch light casting long shadows across the snow. David shoved the door open, and Sarah followed close behind, heart pounding. Emma's cries guided them up the stairs. In the nursery, they found her standing unsteadily in the crib, cheeks red with tears. At the foot of the crib sat Bandit, tense but not aggressive, his body coiled like a spring. He didn't move when Sarah rushed forward to scoop Emma into her arms, the baby quieting at once against her chest. David turned toward the hallway. "Kelly?" The bathroom door creaked open. Kelly stepped out slowly, her face pale, hands trembling. "Is he locked up?" Sarah shook her head, clutching Emma. "He's here, but he hasn't moved." Kelly's eyes widened. "You didn't see him? He attacked me, snarling, teeth bared. I thought he was going for my throat. That animal's dangerous, Sarah. You have to get rid of him before he hurts someone." David's jaw tightened. "Did you do anything that might have startled him?" "Of course not." Kelly's voice cracked with indignation. I was just tucking Emma in, like always. Then he lunged out of nowhere. Bandit shifted slightly, lowering his head, but keeping his gaze fixed on Kelly. The tension in the room pulsed like a drumbeat. Sarah tried to steady her voice. Maybe you should go home for tonight, Kelly. We'll talk tomorrow. Kelly looked stunned. You're choosing that animal over me? After everything? But when neither Sarah nor David responded, she gathered her bag, muttering under her breath as she hurried down the stairs. The slam of the front door echoed through the quiet house. Sarah sank into the rocking chair, Emma drowsing in her arms. Bandit moved closer, settling at her feet, his posture calm once more. The change was so stark, so immediate that Sarah felt a shiver. He had gone from guardian to threat and back again in the blink of an eye, and she couldn't explain it. David rubbed his temples, pacing the room. This doesn't add up. He's never attacked anyone before, not once. And look at him now, calm as anything. Sarah stroked Bandit's fur with trembling fingers. It doesn't make sense, she whispered. But I can't believe he would hurt Emma. Not ever. Downstairs, the house groaned under the weight of wind and snow. In the nursery, the firelight flickered against the walls, casting long shadows. Bandit lifted his head, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the door, as if daring someone to cross. Sarah held Emma tighter, torn between fear and trust, between the voice of her friend and the silent certainty of the raccoon at her feet. That night, long after Emma had drifted back to sleep, Sarah and David lay awake, the unspoken question heavy in the dark. Had Bandit truly turned dangerous, or was he protecting their child from something far more sinister? Morning light seeped pale through the curtains, but neither Sarah nor David had slept much. Emma stirred in her crib, soft sighs escaping between tiny fists, while Bandit lay in his usual place beneath her, eyes half closed but ears alert. The memory of Kelly's frantic call, her accusations, and Bandit's strange behavior weighed heavy in the house. David rubbed his face, voice thick with fatigue. I need to see for myself. We have those security cameras, remember? From when the permit office insisted on monitoring the house after we brought Bandit in. They're motion activated. There should be footage from last night. Sarah clutched Emma tighter. She didn't want to believe Kelly's story, but the image of Bandit bristling, his teeth bared in the shadows, haunted her. What if he did? Snap, she whispered. David shook his head. We'll know soon. Downstairs in his small office, the glow of the computer screen lit David's face as he logged into the cloud storage. Sarah sat behind him with Emma asleep against her shoulder. Bandit curled at her feet like a shadow that refused to leave. For a while the footage was ordinary. Kelly feeding Emma dinner, humming a lullaby, settling her into pajamas. Bandit was visible in the frame too, watching from his corner, tense, but still. Then came the moment. Kelly carried Emma into the nursery, lowered her gently into the crib. At first everything looked normal. She tucked the blanket around the baby, smoothed her hair. Bandit slunk into his usual spot on the rug, but then Kelly glanced toward the door, her expression sharpening. From her pocket, she pulled a tiny black object. David froze the video, leaning closer. Zoom in. The screen enlarged, grainy but clear enough to see the shape. A small camera, no bigger than a button. Kelly slipped it carefully between Emma's stuffed animals, adjusting it until the lens faced the crib. Sarah's breath caught. Oh my God! David pressed play again. Kelly reached into her pocket once more, this time producing something flat and metallic. Another device, like a transmitter. She bent to slide it beneath the crib mattress. That was when Bandit rose, every hair on his body stiff with warning. He padded forward, shoulders hunched, growl visible even without sound. Kelly spun, her face flashing panic. She shoved the transmitter back into her pocket, snatched her bag, and tried to bolt for the door. But Bandit lunged, not at her throat as she had claimed, not at her arms, but directly at her pocket, claws swiping the fabric where the device was hidden. Kelly shrieked and fled into the hallway, slamming herself into the bathroom. Bandit didn't chase. Instead, he returned to the crib, pawing furiously at the blankets until the hidden camera tumbled free and clattered to the floor. Then he curled back beneath Emma, guarding her as if nothing had happened. The video ended, and the silence in the office pressed against them like a weight. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. He wasn't attacking her. He was protecting Emma. David sat back, pale. She lied. She lied to us. Bandit looked up from the floor, as if he knew the truth had finally landed. David replayed the footage from earlier weeks, searching through the logs. 3 more times, they found Kelly placing small devices under the crib, near the window, behind the rocking chair. And 3 more times, Bandit had interfered, pacing or growling, preventing her from finishing. Sarah pressed a hand over her mouth. How long has she been doing this? At least a month, David said grimly. Maybe longer. Her stomach turned. Kelly, the woman who had stood beside her at her wedding, who had whispered encouragement through years of infertility, who had held Emma only hours after her birth. Betrayal cut deep, sharper than any knife. We need to call the police, David said. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white around the mouse. Sarah nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She looked down at Bandit, who stretched and placed one small hand on her slipper, as if to say, I told you. An hour later, Detective Helen Rodriguez sat at their kitchen table, her notepad open, eyes sharp but kind. Sarah replayed the footage, her voice trembling as she explained. Bandit was shut in the bedroom, though Sarah hated closing the door on him after all he'd done. The detective watched carefully, her jaw tightening as the hidden camera came into view. You did the right thing calling us. This equipment isn't for innocent purposes. We've seen it before. It usually ties back to networks that exploit children. If what you're showing me is true, your friend may be connected to something far bigger. Sarah's heart broke all over again. She was my best friend. I trusted her with my baby. Rodriguez's voice softened. You couldn't have known, but your Raccoon did. David glanced toward the stairs, his voice thick. He's saved Emma more times than we realized. The detective closed her notepad. We'll take it from here. For now, keep the footage secure, don't contact her, and let us do our work. But I can tell you this, without that Raccoon intervening, it could have gone on much longer. When the detective left, Sarah sank into the rocking chair, Emma asleep in her arms. Bandit padded over, curling at her feet, his golden eyes calm but watchful. She bent low, whispering through her tears. You saved her, Bandit. You saved us. David rested a hand on her shoulder. Now we know. Now we can stop it. The snow outside thickened, muting the world in white silence. Inside, the truth sat heavy but clear. The Raccoon they had once called a thief and trickster had proven to be something far greater. Protector, guardian, hero. And yet, even as relief settled in, Sarah knew this was not the end. Kelly's betrayal was only the beginning of a darker truth waiting to be uncovered. The days that followed felt like living in the center of a storm. The police moved quickly, first questioning Sarah and David, then seizing the devices Kelly had left behind. Within a week, the case stretched far beyond the quiet street in Vermont. Detective Rodriguez returned to their kitchen one snowy afternoon with a folder thick with notes and photographs. She placed it on the table, her voice grave. Your friend wasn't working alone, she said. She was connected to a ring that stretches across 3 states, dozens of families, dozens of children. They were being watched without ever knowing. Thanks to your footage, we've already made several arrests. Without Bandit, we might not have caught it in time. Sarah sat in silence, holding Emma close. Her daughter's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb, grounding her in the moment. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath the grief, gratitude swelled until she could hardly breathe. Bandit had been right all along. News spread quickly. Local headlines ran with stories of the raccoon who saved a baby, and soon national reporters were calling the house. Cameras were parked outside their driveway, voices eager for sound bites. David handled most of it, standing tall and steady, while Sarah kept Emma away from the flashing bulbs. Through it all, Bandit remained unchanged, mischievous one moment, solemn the next, always hovering near the crib, as though the noise of the world meant nothing compared to his one true task. One evening, Martha stopped by with a pot roast and weary eyes. She stood in the doorway, watching Bandit waddle across the kitchen floor, dragging one of David's boots in triumph. "Well," she sighed, "I still don't trust raccoons in general, but I suppose this one's earned his place." David laughed, but Sarah saw the softness in her mother's gaze when Bandit curled around Emma's playmat later, gently batting her rattle back toward her chubby hands. Martha even bent to stroke his fur, muttering, "Just don't make me regret this." Winter gave way to spring. The snow melted from the eaves, and the maples dripped with sap. A life in the Miller house found a new rhythm, quieter, safer, though shadows of the past still lingered. Kelly had been taken away in handcuffs, and Sarah refused to speak her name out loud anymore. But she could not erase the ache of betrayal, nor the image of her oldest friend's smile now warped by deceit. What soothed her most were the small, ordinary moments. Emma laughing as Bandit tugged at a string of toy blocks. David shaking his head as he discovered another sock hidden in the cereal box. Martha sitting by the fire, Emma asleep in her arms, Bandit sprawled like a cat across her feet. These were the snapshots that reminded Sarah of what mattered: her family, her daughter's safety, and the unlikely guardian who had made both possible. On the day Emma turned 2, the backyard filled with balloons and laughter. Neighbors gathered, bringing pies and casseroles. Children darted between the pine trees, their boots muddy, their cheeks flushed with joy. Sarah stood at the porch railing, watching the celebration unfold with a heart lighter than it had been in years. Bandit sat under his favorite pine tree, eyes scanning the yard with quiet authority. Every so often, Emma toddled toward him, arms outstretched. He let her hug him fiercely, his striped tail curling around her as though he had always belonged in her world. Detective Rodriguez arrived midway through the party, a rare smile softening her features. "Your security system looks content," she teased, nodding toward Bandit. Sarah laughed, her eyes misting. He approved every guest on the list. The detective grew serious. "I've worked cases for over a decade, and I've never seen anything like what your raccoon did. He wasn't just protecting, he was exposing the danger. Without him, we might never have found those other families." David joined them, handing Sarah a slice of cake. His voice was steady, but his eyes glistened. "The experts keep saying the same thing, that he must have sensed something in her scent, her behavior, something we couldn't. Whatever it was, it saved lives." Rodriguez nodded. "The judge even mentioned him during sentencing. He said it was a reminder that innocence has many protectors, not all of them human." As if on cue, Emma waddled over and threw her arms around Bandit's neck, pressing her cheek to his fur. Most parents would have gasped, fearing claws and teeth, but Sarah and David only smiled. Bandit leaned into the embrace, purring softly, his eyes warm with devotion. "He saved more than just Emma," Sarah whispered, watching them. "He saved all those children we'll never even know. And he gave us back our peace." The party carried on, the sun sinking golden behind the hills, casting long shadows across the yard. Bandit remained at his post beneath the tree, eyes alert. But when Emma squealed with laughter, he rose, trotted over, and joined her in her game, tugging at balloons and scattering the children into peals of laughter. Mischief and guardian both, he was everything his name promised, and more. That night, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Sarah carried Emma upstairs. Bandit followed as always, settling beneath the crib. Sarah leaned against the doorway, watching the two of them bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight. She felt tears prick her eyes, not of fear, but of gratitude so deep it left her trembling. "You'll never sleep alone, sweetheart," she whispered to Emma. Then her gaze fell to Bandit. "Not while he's here." The raccoon blinked up at her, his mask of fur catching the faint light, his eyes steady and certain. Mischievous thief, unlikely friend, faithful protector. He had been all of these. And now, in the quiet of the Miller home, he was more than that. He was family. And so the story closed where it had begun, with a raccoon who refused to leave a child's side, whose instincts ran deeper than human trust, and whose love, wild, untamed, and pure, had brought safety where danger once lurked. The world would remember Bandit as the raccoon who saved a baby. But to Sarah, David, and Emma, he was simply theirs. The guardian angel in striped fur, the watchful eyes in the night, the little bandit who had become their hero. And now, I'd love to hear from you. If Bandit's story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments, so I know you're with us. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next incredible story. We've got more heart-stopping moments and uplifting tales coming your way.